You're right. Hey, Jed.
Peel Park in northeast Lancashire, home of Accrington Stanley, a name that has a unique place in football folklore. Now the stands and terracing are gone, and it's hard to imagine a crowd of over 17,000 packed in, cheering every move on the field. But it was here that a national news story broke in March 1962, and the story has never been forgotten.
The pressure on me was enormous. I can tell you that now. For the simple reason, one particular week, with no wages for the players. And Accrington agreed with Workington Town for me at 3,500, which would have paid the wages for that week, or for maybe 3 or 4 weeks after. And if you can imagine that I were only 17 then, walking into the dressing room, you're there with married men who have no wages coming in. The wages weren't like they were today, obviously. They'd no money coming in for the families, and they say to me, what are you going to do?
Much to everybody's surprise, I'm not sure who was responsible for the ultimate resignation and so forth, but I would have thought that industry in Accrington and the public could have rallied probably more to Accrington's help.
They should never have went out of the league. They were about, they say they were at 65,000, which was £65,000 in debt, which was a lot of money then, more now. But I'm sure if people had realised that they were actually going out of the league, businessmen, they would have kept them going, because, I mean, a name like Accrington Stanley was an advertisement for any product that was made in Accrington. So I think if they had realised they were really going out of the league, or they would have, I'm sure they would have kept it alive.
I do feel that that particular grandstand that they bought was possibly one of the reasons that Accrington Stanley came out of the Football League. In my opinion, it was the downfall of Accrington Stanley. This particular stand which was bought was situated at Aldershot. And at Aldershot, of course, they had the games situated a long way from the playing areas. And unfortunately, when the stand was erected at Accrington, which had cost over £17,000, it was found that the spectators sitting in certain parts of the stand could not see the match. They could only see over the ground and the top of the hotel, the Peel Park Hotel, which was directly opposite the Accrington Stanley. And to me, this was a tragedy for Accrington Stanley. And obviously, the repayments on this particular stand caused Stanley considerable embarrassment, financial embarrassment.
I'm the only player who was ever transferred from the Football League. Not from Accrington Stanley, because Accrington had gone into liquidation. So I then became the property of the Football League.
From going to Accrington and seeing the big stand they bought from Aldershot, and then all of a sudden they had to come out of the Football League financially, did nothing, everything was dismantled. The Lancashire County Council took over and spent £25,000 replanting trees, and if that money had been invested in the club, they'd have still been in Football League.
Accrington's football history stretches back 113 years. Fowd Reds started as a pub team when the game was little more than a no-holes-barred rough and tumble. But it was entertaining enough to draw crowds, and crowds pay. The local cricket club soon invited the footballers to share their ground in Thorneyholme Road. It is little changed from Victorian times, and the concrete foundations of a grandstand built for the football still remain. The growth of organised fixtures was a northern phenomenon, and the paying of footballers was scorned by the Football Association. Thus, the Professional Football League was born, and 12 clubs were invited to join it in 1888. Just look at the company Accrington found itself in. Accrington may have headed the list alphabetically, but the Athletic News was unimpressed, reporting that Accrington were not particular whether they won or lost matches with the clubs admittedly inferior to them. The team had some fine individuals. Howarth, in the centre of the middle row, won 5 cups for England, and Whitehead, bottom left, also represented the country. But the doubters were proved right. By 1893, Accrington were bottom of the league, in arrears with the rent, and forced to resign from the Football League after just 5 years. Conspicuous success in the Lancashire combination followed when the few remaining players joined forces with a junior side named Stanley Villa. Accrington Stanley emerged from the union and attracted a loyal following at Moorhead Enclosure, now Moorhead High School. Stanley became one of the leading local teams in Edwardian times, but by 1916, organised sport had ceased. The country was in the midst of the First World War, and most of the town's young men were fighting in France under the banner of the Accrington Pals. The memory of the Accrington Pals may well have been the spur to re-establish Football League status in the town. Significant progress was made a year after the war, when Peel Park was purchased for £2,500 and independence was secured for the first time. In 1921, a limited company was formed, and Stanley became founder members of the 3rd Division North. Peel Park consisted of 92 acres on an eminence known locally as the Coppice. This film was taken in 1960, but back in 1921 it was not ready for the enthusiastic Accrington public, and people gathered wherever they could to get a view. The Roaring Twenties, however, largely passed Accrington by. With limited success on the field, financial difficulties were never far away. 2 cup ties brought in healthy revenues because they took place at larger stadiums. In 1926, 38,000 saw Bolton win a 3rd round tie 1-0 at Burden Park, and a year later 30,000 saw Stanley take on Chelsea at Stamford Bridge in a 4th round tie. The Londoners went on the rampage, winning by 7 goals to 2.
I remember that one particular match was a match when the ground was pretty well packed to capacity, And one particular day, we couldn't get in the ground, we had no money, and we're climbing over the wall at the top end of the terrace, and I got to the top of the wall, and the police officer came along, and he said to me, he said, come on, come down from there. I said, which side of the wall do you want me to come down on? He said, well, if you had any sense, you'd go down on the other side, which I did quite a way, and I really enjoyed that particular match. It was very enjoyable.
In 1937, there were signs of prosperity. The supporters' club had paid for a new dressing room block, which still stands today, and the team enjoyed a famous cup victory in a replay against Blackburn Rovers here at Peel Park. 2 years later, the country was at war.
Well, I supported Accrington Stanley as a boy, of course, and I remember at the outbreak of war, they were actually top of the third division, having played 3 and won 3. When war started, of course, football ceased, and Accrington went into non-league football. I think it was the Lancashire combination, or it could have been Blackburn. Jack Wigglesworth, who was secretary, and Sam Pilkington, who was chairman, run the club, and I was very pleased to play for them as an amateur in that league until going into the forces. Well, I watched Accrington Stanley, of course, in the 50s when there's some very big attendances. They were one of the first clubs, really, with floodlights on telegraph poles and so forth. They were very effective, and they're quite some good gates.
Yes, they're one of the first clubs in the country to have floodlights, and we had some very enjoyable matches on the floodlights. Again, they used to play some of the top clubs in the country for midweek matches. I will remember one particular match they played against Tottenham Hotspur. Majority of the First Division Scottish teams then came down to play Accrington Stanley, and they were very enjoyable matches.
Yes, I think one of the first ones was East Fife, and at that time they had about either 3 or 4 current Scottish internationals. Legs Fleming that went to Sunderland, Big Alan Brown, I think it went to Blackpool, centre forward, and 1 or 2 others. And they were great crowd pullers. You know, they were first in line with the lights, and they were getting people from all over, stimulating a lot of interest. Blackburn were one of the leading lights then. You're talking about Willie Kelly, Clayton, Briggs, Quigley and Langton. So it was a sellout from the word go. I mean, Eckersley in those days, he was the current English left back. So I couldn't wait to get playing against him. He was about as big as myself, about 5'4". So I thought, well, we're evenly matched here. And it was a smashing game. We drew 2 each, and I think we're very, very unlucky not to beat them. And they were trying all they knew. There were 17,000, and I remember going up to the game, and there were buses piled along Alice Street. All the Turkish Street, all the streets leading up were chock-a-block. And it was wonderful. And of course, we were always out with the pipe band. Big Roger Colbridge, the pipe major, he led them all out, and they played every game before we went out. It was smashing. And of course, you looked across in those days at the Burnley roadside, and it was low before the new stand. And it was like Apaches, the smoke signals going up, you know, in the cool night.
Walter Galbraith, what a magical name when you mention Accrington Stanley. Walter Galbraith was by name, he was a true Scotsman. And being a Scotsman, obviously, he brought many of his Scottish players down to Accrington Stanley to play football for them. And one particular match, I will remember, that they had the whole team, 11 Scottish players, playing in the seat.
Well, I was the first player that Walter signed. He'd taken over Accrington, which were very, very mediocre in those days. They hadn't won a match for a long time. They finished bottom of the table. They were seeking re-election. So really, I think he had a big heart taking over a team like that. But anyhow, when he asked me to sign, I wasn't sure which team he represented till I asked him, and then I nearly took a fit. I thought, well, I'm not that bad, surely. But anyhow, he promised, he said, he's going to get a good team. And he did. He signed a few players myself, Joe Henderson, Willie White. Then he signed Harold Bodle, Les Cocker from Stockport, Harry Eastham, Joe Cadden from Liverpool, and he wound his way around and he finished up with about 9 or 10 jocks and 1 or 2 English lads.
Well, it was very much different from what it is now, really, playing football and joining a club like Accrington Stanley. They were really down and out, and well, the only way they could go was up, and we signed a lot of young Scottish players, and we improved as the season went on, and we never looked back after that. We had a good manager and good trainer, and it was really a good experience playing there.
I had been playing for Dunfermline. We got relegated that season, and Accrington Stanley came for me, you see, and Workington came for me. But I came to Accrington because one of my mates played with Accrington, you see.
Well, I suppose it's the floodlight matches at Alloa Athletic. Come down here, we played Stanley, and snowball from there. A few weeks after, I come down as a Stanley player.
My name is Norrie McCready, and I came from Partick Thistle in Scotland to join Accrington Stanley. I think it was about 1955-56. And although I played most of my career in Scotland, I think I enjoyed myself more with Accrington Stanley than I ever enjoyed it with anybody, really. They were such a friendly team, perhaps because they were an all-to Scottish team, of course.
I can remember that he could motivate the players very well, and he could make you think that you were better than the other team. No bother, and it made a big difference to your play.
Yes, you could tell a player, you know, that playing against a top-notcher, you know, a well-known player, star, and he could motivate a player and that player would go out and run rings round about, and it built up his confidence, you know, so much. That was one thing he was really good at, motivating a player. You'd say, well, you're better than him, you're running rings round, and the bloke would go out and do that, you know.
Well, Walter was a right good-looking guy. You know, he had the film star looks, Don Amici, in those days. But he was quiet in his own way, but very shrewd. He knew what he wanted. He could tell you in no uncertain terms if you played bad, but he didn't show you up in front of anybody. He was good. And he was, I think he had good qualities as a manager. I think he'd have done well with a bigger team, you know, if he'd had money to buy players with. No, he was a good man, and a good living man was Walter.
He motivated players. He was I wouldn't say he had charisma or anything like that outside football, but towards players, he made a player feel that he was a good player, a better player than really what he was, and Sean True did that.
The Liverpool Cup tie in 1956. I can tell you a little bit about that. I thought really we should have got a little bit more out of that game than what we did, because I mean, as you probably know, they beat us 2-0, but there certainly wasn't 2-0 in the two sides. You know, the difference between the two sides really was Billy Liddell, and I think personally against the run of play he scored 2 goals, and but that's all in football. Thoroughly enjoyed the game. The atmosphere was marvellous. Liverpool supporters were marvellous, you know, so it was a great day out.
No, the Liverpool Cup tie, that was a fantastic experience. It was, in fact, it started the few days before, because we went to Norbreck Hydro for a few days, and that was an experience in itself. Only the big clubs used to go there. But the game itself was a tremendous game. We played very well indeed. In fact, we were a bit unlucky. We lost 2-0, but it was 2 goals that only Billy Liddell could have scored, who was a top internationalist at that time.
It was a cup tie we had on the Saturday, and went for a couple of days before to Norbreck Hotel. And when we went there, Wolves were there Now Wolves would be playing would it be Blackpool? I'm not sure who they were playing, but they were also at the North break. And just to get mixed with players like teams like that, you know, it was terrific, you know.
Liverpool then weren't the Liverpool now. You're talking about the pre-Shankly era. And they had good players, Alan Aycourt and people like that. And of course the one and only Billy Liddell. He was the leading light. Mr. Liddellpool was Billy. And invariably he scored the 2 goals that beat us.
Stanley at that time were having a little bit of difficulty with penalty kicks. They were taking them and missing them, and then someone would take them and score a couple, and then he'd miss. So it was going round in a rota. So I got the turn, my turn came, and it was a York game, and it was at the top end here, the penalty. Well, I thought, well, the best thing to do is hit it as hard as I can. So I did do, but I hit it too hard, and it struck the crossbar, and it went right over the halfway line, off the crossbar, and the centre forward Story of York ran on and scored at the other end. I was still stood in the penalty spot.
Well, the game against Norwich, Stanley were terrific. They were outstanding. I mean, say, Norwich, at that time, nobody could beat them, really, at home. There was this year that Norwich went to the semi-final of the FA Cup, and Stanley went down there and scored 4 goals against them.
Norwich, we played away at Norwich. Norwich had done very well in the Cup that year. In fact, I think they went to the semi-final that year. They were a good team. We were playing mediocre stuff at that time, but we turned in a performance then that was second to none. It was a thoroughly professional show. And Terry Ty, I must mention Terry Ty, he scored a goal that day. It was one of the best goals I've ever seen in my life. He took the ball up from halfway line, and he just seemed to go right through the defence, and nobody tackled him, and he slotted it in from about 18 yards, and it was a beautiful goal. I'll never forget it.
It's worth reflecting on those years between 1954 and 1958. Walter Galbraith's Scottish Wizards won 100 league games and scored 366 league goals. Their placings, second, third, and second, were not enough to gain promotion. Only the champions went up at that time. What the Reds had on their side was this ground at Peel Park and a goal-scoring phenomenon called George Stewart, 135 goals in 182 games.
Today's values, I think George would be among the best. He must have been at least £2-3 million player. Every year you could say 35 goals, he'd maybe missed 35, but he'd score 35. Never seen a better header of the ball in all my time, and I played for 20 years. I've seen all the greats, and George compares in the air with Lawton, Morty, the lot. It's just a pity he wasn't as clever with his feet. Mind you, wouldn't he played with Accrington? He'd been as clever with his feet, but he was a brilliant player.
George Stewart, well, George was unique. He'd be worth £1 million now if he was playing. He was that prolific goal scorer, especially with his head. He was a tremendous header of the ball. But as a goal scorer, there were very few like him. He was a tremendous player.
The intimidating part for teams coming was the big cop behind one goal. That was intimidating for a start. And of course there were a slope on the ground. The surroundings, the crowd was very, very similar to Queen's Park Rangers when I went there. They were right on the ground. And also, it wasn't a small ground. The actual playing pitch was very, very big at Accrington, but it looked smaller than what it was. But the slope went from corner to corner. It didn't go straight down the ground, it went from corner to corner. I think it was something like about a 9-foot drop. You know, so it was intimidating, and you came out in between the spectators. There were no covers, you know, they were just a piece of wire netting over there. So as soon as teams walked out, you know, the Accrington supporters were onto them straight away.
Peel Park was, as a ground, it was a sloping ground, or a big slope on it. But it didn't seem to matter, but when you got a full house there, it was a tremendous atmosphere. It was, as you say, it was people were pressing, you were near the crowd weren't away from you, you were near the crowd, you could hear individual comments, sometimes adverse, but it was a tremendous atmosphere, just to play in a small ground like that with a big crowd.
What I remember is that big terrace in there, and the clock. There was the clock over there, and it was always packed. That's the biggest memory I've got. They were in like sardines many a game, you know, they were really packed. About 10 or 12,000. And of course the little stand here. And it was a right homely little ground, you know, and the crowd was always near you. In Scotland, I was used to the crowds were far away from you. You couldn't hear the cracks and all the wisecracks, but the crowd here, and they all seemed to be right close beside you and cheering you on. And you got that atmosphere. It was like when they were playing downhill, it was like the charge of the Light Brigade when the Reds were playing downhill. And the crowd were egging us on to, you know, and I thoroughly loved it, you know, thoroughly enjoyed it.
They got the stand from Aldershot, but unfortunately, I think it crippled them financially in transportation, if I remember rightly. The club then had serious financial problems. I recall that they did approach Bob Lord, who was the chairman at the club at the time. I was secretary, of course, with a view to him assisting all he could. This he did. I think it's been a wrong impression has been given that he was instrumental of Accrington Stanley folding up. That was certainly not the case. He did all he could, but obviously he was not such a rich man as you have in a lot of clubs today, even though he was a successful businessman. He couldn't help them out financially, not to meet the debts that had accrued.
I will remember Bob Lord, and I say Bob Lord was by profession a butcher, and many people in the borough said that Bob Lord had butchered Accrington Stanley. I do remember that particular time. I think Bob Lord was the chairman of Burnley, and he came to Accrington Stanley. I'm speaking now immediately after the resignation had gone into the Football League, and he mentioned to the, shall I say, those shareholders and the directors that Accrington Stanley finished, there's no chance of salvation for them.
Burnley Football Club was extremely sorry that this was the case, because obviously we much prefer to be playing the likes of Accrington Stanley neighbouring clubs than playing the likes of Torquay and a lot of other southern clubs.
Accrington's weekly routine soon got used to the absence of a football team, and many mementos, programmes and handbooks were thrown out in dismay. Nobody could have forecast the enormous interest that Accrington Stanley memorabilia has generated, and these items don't come cheap. In the same way that we have become nostalgic about the age of steam, we have developed for some a business in Stanley nostalgia. One of the country's top 3 dealers is Alan Clegg.
I'm a football programme collector and also a football programme dealer. I've collected for about the last 20 years and also been in business dealing with football programmes for the last 13 years full-time. Well, the first one's season 1936-37, FA Cup 3rd round, Blackburn Rovers versus Accrington Stanley. There was a draw at Ewood in the first round, and the replay at Accrington. Accrington won 3-1. The next programme I have is same season, the 4th round of the FA Cup, Manchester City versus Accrington Stanley. Unfortunately, Accrington went out of the cup in that round, Manchester City winning 2-0. The next programme, very rare programme indeed, from season 1921-22. Now this is Accrington Stanley's first programme and match coming back into the league against Rochdale. Very rare item.
Value?
Value on this one. Difficult to say, but somewhere in the region of about £1,000. Possibly the only one in existence. The next one's a view of a match at Peel Park. In the background you can see the copies. I'm not sure of the day, but I should imagine pre-war. This is a team group photograph from 24-25. This is my own collection of Accrington Stanley medals. When they were issued in the 50s, the price, I think I remember rightly, was about 6p or 9p. The badge in the centre is a Cup Winners, Lancashire Combination Cup Winners medal from 22-23. The individual badges on today's price would sell for about £20 each.
Our own discovery of movie footage has proved to be a first. Not even the BBC could come up with any. David Pickup's 8mm film, shown here, contains the only moving images of Old Stanley in existence. In these games, a teenager named Mike Ferguson made his early appearances for Accrington Stanley. This is his story.
I was born in Burnley. I used to travel to most of the evening matches of Accrington Stanley when they played the friendlies. I wrote to Plymouth for a trial. I had previous trials with Sunderland, Wolves, Preston, and I wanted to be in professional football. And they were good enough to invite me down for a trial, and I accepted it all that long way to Plymouth. It was a long, long way, and I never used to get home to Burnley very much. And I came home one summer for a 2-week holiday, and I got on the bus in Burnley and went across to Accrington and went to the club and spoke to the secretary and asked them if there was a chance of going to Accrington Stanley. And in the evening, the secretary phoned me and said they would sign me. I didn't have any trial. And it was the start for me, and I was playing in the league at just gone 16 years of age, and it's a dream. And at that age, in them days, to actually playing league football was phenomenal, really. I think there was only 3 of us who did it at that time, at that age, was Trevor Hockey, myself and Ian Gibson, who of course was an Accrington Stanley player. You never forget your first game in the Football League, which was against Gillingham, midweek game. And I didn't know until 6:30 when I arrived at the ground that I was playing. And I got into the side for that particular game. The previous week they'd played Gillingham, at Gillingham, and Lawson Bennett, who was destined for stardom in them days, received a bad injury from a fullback called Hunt. And he was an hard player, and I had to play against him. My last game was against Rochdale, the last game we played. I think there was very few people on the ground. It was deserted, in fact. But having said that, we didn't realise till the Monday or the Tuesday that it was the end of Accrington Stanley. I'm the only player who was ever transferred from the Football League. Not from Accrington Stanley, because Accrington had gone into liquidation. So I then became the property of the Football League. The actual amount of games that I did play for Accrington, I think was in the region of 62, 63. But officially, I think it's down as about 23 because of the expulsion of the team from the league. But that's the amount I played.
Most football fans outside Lancashire think that the Accrington Stanley story finishes here. Boys kick around in the eerie silence of Peel Park, in the footsteps of professional footballers from long ago. But it is not so. A new club has risen from the ashes, and can be found at the Crown Ground, close by to Moorhead, where the first Accrington Stanley team played at the start of the 20th century.
Alex, get him going!
Stanley are in the HFS Loans League Premier Division, having been promoted last season. They only finished 4th, but both South Liverpool and Worksop failed ground safety examinations, allowing the Reds to seek promotion. It's a welcome turn of fortune and leaves Stanley 1 league away from the Vauxhall Conference and the possibility of promotion from there into the 4th division.
My attitude is with the players to play for the club, not just coming to play for money, where money has come into it, and it's in a big way these days. But to me, discipline, attitude, and the right you want to play for Accrington Stanley. And if every player has that attitude, they will succeed and go in the Football League.
I think inevitably they will return someday, but whether in my lifetime, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess.
Come on, let's win it! Yeah, nice. Come on, Half left back, Becky. Just the right shoulder, Becky. Go on with it. Jimmy, get that. Come on, Red, ready for you! Come on, Red! Move out. Hold back in! Stevie! Stevie!
If Stanley do make it back to the Football League, it will not be lost on the many players of Old Stanley who still live in the town. Many of the famous Scots have raised families in Accrington and are close to retirement.
Left back, Becky.
The final word to Charlie Snedden.
Oh, I enjoyed every minute. I enjoyed football before I even came down here, but being down here was an experience that everybody that loves football should go through. There are ups and there's downs, but really there are a lot of ups. I enjoyed it.
Let's get him in, Jed, keep him in.
You're right. Hey, Jed.
Wait, give it. You offside. Get in. Come on, let's win it.
Yeah. Nice.
Come on,